Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our IGD session today on global retail trends. So let's do the introductions first. So my name is Simon Wainwright, and I'm Director of Insight here at IGD, and today I will be chairing the session. I'm delighted to be joined by three colleagues, all experts in their own area. Representing our shopper team, we have Vanessa.
Hi there.
From the supply chain team, we have Chris.
Hi, everyone.
And completing the lineup, we have Toby, who heads up our innovation area here at IGD.
Hello, it's great to be here with everyone.
So we've got 5 topics we want to cover today. They're on the screen for you now. To ensure that we get the most out of the session for all of you out there, I'm going to keep the pace quite high. So if you've got questions out there that relate to these topics, we're going to take those questions on at the end of each topic. So do post your questions through as we go through. So we'll take questions at the end of each topic. So don't be shy, do put your questions through to us. So our first topic today is sustainability. Toby, I'm going to come to you first. What will firms do to increasingly take the lead on sustainability?
So sustainability came firmly back into the agenda, both socially, from a legal perspective, and also from a sort of a retail and business perspective in 2018. And a lot of that focus was around packaging and packaging free, or plastic packaging free, I should say. And we saw some really interesting initiatives by retailers. So we saw the launch of the world's first plastic free pop-up store in Amsterdam. We even saw an unpacked packaging free or zero waste grocery store in Singapore. Going forward, we really think we're going to start seeing retailers looking to differentiate around sustainability, moving beyond packaging and actually looking to really sort of showcase what they're doing to sort of really help the environment and sort of society from a sustainability perspective.
And Vanessa, if I can bring you in here, how do shoppers feel about sustainability? Is it cutting through with them yet?
Well, from our Shopper Vista research, we know that awareness of sustainability is absolutely increasing. The majority of shoppers actually say they're aware of plastic packaging in food and grocery products, and are even more so over the last year. And we know that some shoppers are actually starting to make changes to some of the ways that they live and buy products based on programs such as David Attenborough's Blue Planet program. However, for the moment, when it comes to the crunch, when shoppers are at shelf, basic needs, basic shopper needs actually come to the fore first. So is it good value? Is it convenient? Does it give me the right choice? So I think for the moment, sustainability isn't quite cutting through with shoppers. But we do see this changing, and particularly among the younger generation. So I think for companies, it's really important to start planning for this shift in mindset.
Interesting. So what I'm picking up here then is there must be some form of impact for the supply chain. So Chris, help me understand this a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. So a lot of what Toby and Vanessa have described, I guess the fallout of that, or the role to operationalize that, falls into sort of the supply chain remit. One of the ways that we're seeing that manifest itself is through circularity and the circular economy. And that's something we expect to gain a lot of traction in the year to come. So I guess the idea aligns quite strongly with IGD's view of what supply chain will bring to business in future, and that growth agenda, while obviously helping to cater to changing consumer needs. And that's something we're really strongly behind. But I think it's about the changing perception of circularity really within business. So moving away from this idea that it's something that's nice to do, and something that actually can add direct value to business. So we had a business speaker at our supply chain summit last year, Tomra, who are working in this space, and they actually tried to put a financial estimate on what it might look like for the economy, the global economy, actually, if we recycled more plastic. So they put a price tag of something like 50 to 80 billion. So that's their estimate, a huge amount of money. And actually that can best be achieved when businesses start to look at circularity through design rather than in a reaction or a bolt-on response to what they already do. So that's really how it will manifest itself for the supply chain.
So interesting stuff. So we're starting to see some questions come through, and I would encourage our listeners to send more in. But one thing you mentioned there, Chris, you mentioned the term circular economy. Could you explain that in a bit more detail, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the circular economy essentially is the process of trying to decouple commercial economic activity from consumption of finite resources. And that has been brought more sharply into focus in the last year in particular, as the awareness of what's happening in the environment and to our resources has gained prominence. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to take waste out of the system, really. We're trying to reuse, repurpose components and materials, specifically with the aim of keeping them at their highest utility, which actually keeps them at the highest value. So if you look at that in terms of a practical example, that means turning a bottle that held a beverage once it's reached its sort of natural conclusion back into another bottle that can be used to hold a beverage, rather than taking that material and using it for something else that would offer maybe slightly less value. So that's really it in a nutshell.
One question that a couple of people have raised for me, the 50 to 80 billion that you mentioned, what was the currency for that?
Dollars, sorry.
Dollars, brilliant.
American
Thank you
dollars.
for that. And one thing you did mention was reusables when you're talking about circular economy. Toby, I'm going to come to you. What's the role of reusables in the retail market of the future? What are you seeing?
We're seeing some really interesting initiatives actually by retailers over the last 6 months in this area. So companies like Tesco, Co-op, Morrison's and Iceland are all starting to introduce sort of reverse vending systems into their stores. And what a reverse vending system is, that it's a system where shoppers can bring back plastic bottles that they've bought from that store and basically recycle them in store. And they sometimes get incentives to do this. And actually, in the example of Iceland, they've seen a significant uptake by UK shoppers. So they're saying over 300,000 bottles have been returned in the first sort of half of, the first 6 months of introducing this initiative. And actually, even myself, I had an experience over Christmas, a time where there's quite a lot of packaging being used. Where in my local Tesco, for example, I actually took my own Tupperware, my own plastic container to get products from the deli counter, a new initiative that they've introduced, so that actually you can buy product straight from the deli counter and they'll put it into your own plastic container, save you on plastic. So there's some really interesting examples happening in reusables and the circular economy.
Yeah, just to pick up on a point you made there, Toby. So the research that we did in supply chains for growth actually really supports this idea that business will go after corporate sustainability more strongly. So we have 71% actually of respondents to our survey agreeing that corporate responsibility will be more integrated into business objective and financial reports.
Well, clearly an important area, but I want to move us on because there are other topics that we do need to cover for our listeners today. And the next topic is data. And I'm going to come back to you, Chris, straight away. My question to you, Chris, is from a supply chain perspective, how will data become one of the main building blocks of retail growth?
So data is one of my favourite subjects, so I will jump straight in here. So I think data is massively important. I think what we'll see as we move through today's webcast is that data is underpinning a lot of what we'll talk about. So to call it out explicitly, I think it's really important. It's going to be massively important to supply chain operations and supporting supply chain strategy and the path of supply chain development going forward. But I think data is still in a place where it's not universally seen as useful. And I think we need to move towards that in order for us to get the real value and move away from this idea that it can be a hindrance. And I think there are loads of reasons why it's seen that way. So, making data hard to understand, not organizing it well, and not sharing it, as well as just the sheer amount of data that there is being generated. So it's exciting times in terms of data. I think data combined with a lot of the new technologies that we're seeing, so the Internet of Things and machine learning, that's really going to contribute to providing businesses with more opportunities. But my I guess the utopia for me is really moving into this zone of combining some of those new technologies to create these cycles of the data generation and the transmission of that data, and then the analysis, which will increasingly be automated. And that's sort of where I see it going in the years to come.
You mentioned innovation there, which will bring me over to you in a moment, Toby. So a lot of retailers I meet with at IGD trade briefings are telling me that data is this new battleground. So Toby, what innovations are you seeing in this area?
We're seeing a lot. So yeah, that's the main reason why we called data driving the way is one of our sort of 2019 trends for industry to watch. Data has been essential to modern retail. It's powered sales, inventory systems, supply chains, as Chris was talking about. But actually what it's really starting to do is help retailers understand their shoppers better than ever before. So we're seeing some really interesting examples, and some of these are being led by the larger e-commerce players, so organizations like, or retailers like Alibaba, and they're starting to collaborate with brands where they're sharing data much more, and then we're seeing some really interesting results from that. So example where Mars and Alibaba work together, utilizing shopper insight from Mars and also data collected from Alibaba's web platforms. And they actually created a new chocolate bar tailored specifically for the Chinese consumer. So actually it was a spicy Snickers bar. And when they actually took this product to market, they had significant sales. So a real sort of good and quick win for both retailer and manufacturer. And just this week, we've seen Colgate Palmolive join the likes of L'Oreal and P&G in working with Alibaba to, again, understand products that consumers want based on the data that Alibaba is getting. And again, they've been able to use this big data, sorry for using that term, but this data that they're getting around shopper behavior on these online platforms to really help drive new product development. So in the case of Colgate Palmolive, it would normally take about 18 months to create a new product, a new toothpaste, and actually they managed to whittle this timeline down to just 6 months. So great examples where retailers are able to really collaborate with manufacturers. And to help accelerate this, we're seeing a number of retailers starting to partner with tech companies. So the likes of Walmart working with Microsoft in the US, and M&S working with the likes of Microsoft, and startups and incubators to really sort of help them understand this sort of new data world that we're living in.
Well, it sounds really impressive, but are shoppers okay with this, Vanessa? Where do they stand?
Well, you know, thinking from a shopper perspective, the concerns of personal data privacy are still very real among shoppers. About 3/4 of shoppers in the UK say they believe that a lot of businesses, so not just grocery businesses, but total businesses, misuse personal data. So, for instance, maybe sell on their data to other people. However, some shoppers are actually willing to share more of their data with companies, and it's with companies that they trust. And luckily for us, I suppose, within the food and grocery industry, our industry is one of the most trusted industries in the UK. So for shoppers to actually share data, there has to be a trade-off. They have to feel like they're getting something in return. And I guess this is why in some cases, loyalty cards, certainly in the UK, actually do quite well with some retailers, because shoppers believe they're actually getting something in return. And kind of building on that point around personalization, I think if shoppers feel that they're going to get a more personalized food and grocery shopping experience, they're more likely to share data with suppliers. But I think for the industry, for suppliers and for retailers, being completely open about how you'll use data and spelling out the shopper benefits will be really important to unlock this opportunity in the future.
Absolutely. We are seeing some questions come in, so thank you. I think, Chris,
Yeah, we've got a question here. What do you think is the single most important bit of retail data for supply chain? So quite a big question. I don't have a specific answer to that, but what I can tell you, my view is that any data that we gather from consumers in the consumer space within the store or from the home, that offers the most potential in terms of value-adding potential to the value chain as we see it. So, you know, if you can gather data really early on, you have an opportunity, if you have the right infrastructure and processes in place, to use it in the most number of ways. So I think the examples that Vanessa has spoken about and will speak about will be really crucial for helping businesses, particularly retailers, make the most of the data they gather at the earliest possible opportunity.
So, Chris, data is one thing, people is the other. So how do you think companies should adjust their people strategy and development to keep up with this fast paced and the solutions that are required?
Yep. So we're seeing a much more emphasis on formal skills training, I guess. So we've seen in the UK actually a few announcements from big retailers partnering actually with digital skills businesses to try and get that understanding of how data can be useful at all levels of the organisation, and that really goes from the very top of the organisation. So the example I'm referencing is the Marks and Spencer partnership with Decoded, and they are looking to empower the leaders within their business to make decisions using data and actually cascade that data-driven culture down through the hierarchy of the organization. So I think that's really important. And I think as we move towards a management by exception sort of supply chain, which is directionally where we're heading, we'll have room to do more interesting things, and those things will involve data, and empowering people to be self-disruptive will be really important. And that's where I see things going.
Well, data is clearly a big topic for our audience out there, but I must move us on. So I'm going to move us on to our third topic today, and that's one of health and wellness. So we know that this is a growing trend. We're aware of rising obesity crisis portrayed in the media. Is it just too tricky and confusing for shoppers, Vanessa?
Well, health is a massive topic, as you've spoken about. But when we talk to shoppers about their diets and healthy eating, most of them actually aspire to eat healthily. So from our shopper visitor research, we know that over 3/4 of UK shoppers are trying to improve some part of their diet. But in reality, aspirations don't always translate into action, and I can probably speak for myself when I talk about that as well. And things like, ingrained habits, insufficient motivation, perceived lack of value for money of healthier foods, insufficient. I think I was just muted there, so apologies. I will start again. So just talking about health and among shoppers, we know that shoppers really do aspire to eat healthily. So from our research, we know that the majority of shoppers say they're trying to improve some part of their diet. However, some aspirations don't always translate into action. So things like ingrained habits or insufficient motivations, and also things like perceived lack of value for money of healthier foods, all act as barriers to healthy eating. However, we believe this is going to change, and some of this change will come about by the different motivations that will actually drive people to follow healthier diets. And actually, from our shopper vista research, where we looked at shoppers of the future, we found a really interesting nuance among younger shoppers, where actually the motivations to lead a healthier lifestyle are being much more driven by their image. So they want to look good rather than feel good. And there's some real big tipping points that are pushing this trend forward, like social media, health tracking devices, and growing rates of intolerances and allergies, and also things like government legislation. So we do believe this trend is actually going to come to the fore even more so, and will be very much driven by this younger generation as well.
And Toby, if I can bring you back in, what role do you see that retailers will play in supporting the health and wellness of consumers and shoppers?
We're seeing retailers all over the world really looking to help shoppers as much as possible. To Vanessa's point, is that element of sort of really trying to encourage shoppers on this journey. And we're seeing a lot of retailers introduce sort of behavior change techniques, especially around sort of nudge behavior change, so in-store advice, help, consultations, to sort of really inform and help the shopper, because it can be quite complicated understanding some of these nutritional guidelines and things like that we know from our shopper research. And we've even seen sort of retailers like Waitrose partnering with health providers like Bupa in the UK to offer in-store support and services, to examples in Japan with Lawson's, where they've installed consultation desks to provide free advice on nursing, nutrition, health and wellness. And they're looking to roll these sort of consultation desks out more widely. And again, retailers are utilizing technology in store. So the likes of Albert Heijn, they're using apps, and they've also launched on their website what they're calling My Nutritional Values. And this enables you to sort of tailor your shopping list based on if you're trying to lose weight and sort of reduce saturated fats. And most recently, I saw a really interesting example, or really sort of easy example, I should say, in store, where actually the breakfast cereal was arranged by how much sugar content was in the package of cereal. So as a shopper, you could very quickly identify whether the product you're about to pick up was high in sugar or low in sugar.
Let me just move across to Chris here. Is there a supply chain role here in helping us to eat healthier?
Yeah, I just have a couple of brief builds on what's been said. So I think eating healthy, clearly a growing concern for the consumer market. I think food safety is probably the area where supply chain comes into it, and we've all heard of technologies like blockchain that are beginning to demonstrate some value in this space. So I think we're in early days in terms of what that could look like at sort of scale across, very disparate supply chains. But it's really interesting to see where things are heading. But the concept of blockchains is I guess asks some other questions around people's willingness to share information, and I guess we come back to that data sharing aspect that we spoke about earlier on. But it will be really important that businesses do try to do as much of that as possible, because ultimately the information that consumers are looking for will come out of the supply chains that move goods to them.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. We're starting to see some questions come in. Vanessa, I know there's a question you're keen to take.
Yeah, just very quickly, there was a question about veganism and what role it'll play in sustainability and also health from a shopper point of view. And I think just quickly, veganism and veganuary, obviously it's January now, and we've seen lots in the media about veganism. And we've done some recent research around, I suppose, the role of veganism in people's diets. And for the most part, it's still very niche. So around 4% of shoppers say that they're following a vegan diet most of the time or all of the time, so still very niche. But what we are seeing, which is quite interesting, is shoppers adopting a more flexitarian approach. For anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say that, there's people who are eating less meat, so maybe doing things like meat-free Monday. So I think thinking about the future, I think niche veganism will probably stay quite small, but what will grow is this adoption of flexitarianism, so people probably eating a bit less meat for parts of the week or month.
Interesting stuff. Toby, just to help everybody who's listening in today, you see a lot of retailers across the globe. If you want to provide inspiration, where in the world does IGD see best practice on health and wellness?
That's a big question. I wouldn't necessarily call out one particular area as sort of best in class or one particular region around the world. What we're seeing is retailers all over the world really working in this area around health, nutrition and wellness, really trying to help shoppers live a sort of a better, healthier lifestyle. But we've seen some really interesting examples in the Philippines where zoning by health and wellness of product, as I mentioned earlier, gyms in store in Japan, and the cereal box example, to apps in retailers like Migros in Turkey, where again, you're really helping the shopper choose the products they want based on health, nutritional wellness guidance. So I very much say this is something that we're seeing around the world.
Great. Okay, now let's move on to our fourth topic. Our fourth topic today is seamless shopping. Highly topical and one that I know keeps retailers and manufacturers awake at night. Toby, coming back to you, as we see today's shoppers becoming increasingly mobile savvy and device dependent, how will physical stores become more digital and meet this need and offer a more seamless shopping experience?
So this is a trend we've been tracking for a number of years now, sort of the idea of the physical store getting more digitalized. This is partly driven by the growth of e-commerce. So how can physical stores learn from e-commerce around sort of product information, ease of accessing products, making that shopping in a physical store more seamless. And a lot of that currently is focused on payment. But actually going forward, we really think retailers are going to push way beyond just sort of payment and ease of payment solutions to actually really enhancing the in-store physical shop with the use of mobile phones. So for example, Sam's Club now in the US is trialing a wayfinder and navigation tool. So as a shopper, I can get directed to the products I want. We've even seen companies like Ubermart working with Budgens in the UK, where they have an app that again can direct me based on shopping list I've preloaded onto my phone to where those products are in store. They can give me nutritional information, so the added benefit of what we talked about earlier around health and wellness, and also I can scan and get out the shop as quickly as I like. And we'll start seeing much more of this sort of blend of the physical store working with and enhancing sort of the online store. So example, there were Albert Heijn's, but digital displays at end of aisle. So as a shopper, I can buy big bulk items and get them delivered home. But if I wanted to sort of choose the fresh produce and the things that I'm more maybe particular about, I can then get those in store. So we're seeing a lot in this area, and it's something that we're going to really be covering at IGD Live later in this year, our big flagship event.
Excellent. And Toby, you just mentioned stock management and moving stock around and supplying stuff to consumers in their homes. Chris, I can bring you back in here. What can people working within the supply chain do to support the move to a more seamless shopping experience?
I think for me, it's really about capturing that information, as I said earlier on, at that earliest possible point, so the customer facing end of things, and translating that into something that you can deliver a supply chain improvement against. So I could see, in the store environment, apps being used by the staff of the store, and also the shoppers in that store, generating information and data that could be used for slickening up the replenishment of that store, helping the store identify waste and do more targeted reductions of products and stuff like that. So that's really where I see the supply chain sort of fitting into this seamless store idea.
And Vanessa, I sort of led into this topic with comments that shoppers are increasingly device dependent and mobile savvy. Are we seeing this in food and grocery? Are shoppers prepared to engage with digital solution when it comes to their food and grocery shop?
Well, really interesting, I think, within the UK that, the vast majority of shoppers are actually open to using technology to help them with some part of their food and grocery shopping. However, in the UK, shopper investment in shopper-facing technology in store specifically is probably behind the curve compared to some of the global markets, certainly that Toby was talking about. Just for instance, 7% of shoppers in the UK claim to have paid for their shopping using their phone in the last month. So it's still a relatively small proportion of shoppers. But I think on the flip side, there's a massive opportunity, therefore, to engage with shoppers in store with new technology if companies start to invest in new technologies. And I think putting shopper needs at the heart of that investment will be really important.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I want to move us on to our final topic today, which is social commerce. And obviously, it follows on quite nicely from seamless shopping. It's the trend, towards social commerce, the increasing ability which shoppers are able to use social networks to buy. Vanessa, we hear it's increasing, but how do shoppers feel about it? Is it of limited appeal? What's your thoughts?
I think for the moment, again, kind of building on that point about UK shoppers, and they're very different to shoppers maybe in Asian markets. I think social commerce is still relatively niche, and shoppers are becoming, a bit more used to engaging with brands via technology and new platforms. But in our Shoppers of the Future research, we actually identified a new group of shoppers called influencer shoppers. And these are quite different to other shoppers. They're very much engaged with social media. And we've seen a huge increase of, social media influencers, particularly around the health agenda as well. And these guys are having a real impact on how we're actually engaging with new products and new brands. So I think it's about targeting or identifying groups of shoppers that actually will be an easy win with some of these new technologies to really test and learn and see how well they'll work.
Yeah, agree with that. Chris, there has to be a supply chain implication here from the introduction of essentially a further route to market. So how are companies setting themselves up for success here?
Yeah, so I think social commerce will challenge businesses even more than they're already challenged. It's tough enough with the current mix of channels and routes to market. So I guess there's a couple of things that I'd call out. The role that later customization of products and making later decisions on the exact specification of products and where that happens is going to be really important. So essentially moving those decisions and the actions themselves closer to the customer. And then finally, the idea of expanding micro fulfillment and moving the actual point of dispatch into urban locations where currently it doesn't really exist at scale.
Absolutely. Now, Toby, if I can just bring you back in with your sort of forecasting hat and head on. Is social commerce here to stay? Is it going to grow? Will there be more options for purchasing products on the go?
Yeah, we definitely see this as a trend that's going to be growing. It was talked a lot at our digital commerce event at the end of last year. Again, we see that being talked a lot at IGD Live later in this year, and it's something we're seeing a number of retailers already starting to implement, where you can buy products straight off the likes of Facebook, Instagram, and we're actually seeing industries outside of food and grocery resetting shopper expectations. So again, using Instagram and EasyJet, I can book my flights based on an Instagram photo I see, and these kind of behaviors will start resetting shoppers' expectations. So I can book a holiday that quickly. Why can't I get my food and groceries sort of booked and bought online that quickly? And we even see this going beyond just sort of the likes of social media. Actually, sort of all media will start becoming shoppable. So voice assistants will help this, where I could be watching a TV advert and I might be able to buy directly from the advert I'm watching. Magazines, all these things will become shoppable, and therefore industries may have to start thinking of media as the new shop window. And that obviously is going to create some challenges because they're going to really have to understand much more where the shopper is and really try and gauge and grasp that shopper at that moment of truth, which has moved onto different platforms.
Okay, that's it. Time's up. I want to thank our IGD experts, Vanessa, Chris, and Toby, for joining us this morning. And thank you to everyone out there who has joined us today. Before you all go, before you disappear, much of what has been discussed today was taken from a series of flagship reports that IGD produced in 2018. These are all free to download using that URL on the screen in front of you. Please pop in there and take those reports. They're free to download. They're in PDF format. And most of you we can see are IGD members. Some of you are not. Just to say that much of the stuff we've covered on health, on data, on all of the topics today can be found on IGD's research services across the 4 services there. So do take time to have a look at those. If you want to know a bit more about how you can subscribe to IGD services, there is an email address on the screen. So it's a final goodbye for me. Thank you for your attention this morning. Have a good day, and we'll hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.